There comes a time in life, usually after 60, when the silence of a room speaks louder than the noise we used to chase. And in that silence, sometimes the eyes well up, not from pain, but from remembering, from the weight of what was lost or maybe what was never said. I've met many seniors in my years, strong men, proud women, who spent decades holding back tears. Because somewhere along the way we were told crying was weakness, that emotion was something to be managed, hidden, or swallowed. But let me ask you something. What if crying is not the end of strength, but the beginning of healing? What if that tear you held back for years was actually the door to peace? Today in this episode of Elderly Reflections, I want to share with you why crying after 60 is not a failure, but a form of freedom. Backed by elderly wisdom, science, and the voices of real seniors from across Europe and America, this might just change the way you look at your own tears. And before we begin, if this is the kind of content that speaks to your heart, I invite you to subscribe and turn on the notifications. This channel is here for people like you, people seeking truth, healing, and a little peace. Let's begin. You know, the older I get, the more I realize we don't cry just because we're sad. We cry because we've held too much for too long. And the strange thing is, after 60, it's not the big things that break you, it's the quiet ones. A photograph, an empty chair, a birthday that passes without a call. So today I want to walk with you through something we often misunderstand. Why seniors cry. And no, it's not weakness, it's not giving up. It's the body's way of saying, let me breathe. There are 6 emotional triggers I've seen time and time again in seniors across Europe and America. Things that crack open even the strongest hearts. Let's take them one by one. The first is unprocessed grief. Most people think grief ends after a funeral, but anyone over 60 knows that's not true. Grief stays. It hides behind routines, and then one day you smell the perfume she used to wear, or you find his old sweater folded in a drawer. That's when it hits. I remember meeting Eleanor, 82, in New Jersey. Her husband had passed away 10 years before. She never cried, never talked much about it, but one morning she opened their wedding album and saw a note he'd written in the corner of a page. "You'll always be my girl." She held the book to her chest and finally wept. She told me, "I thought I was past it, but I guess the heart has its own calendar." The second is regret over missed connections. As we grow older, we start to think about who we didn't call back, who we stopped writing to, who we let drift away. And those memories, they come with a sharp edge. I spoke with a man named Charles, 76, in Manchester. He told me he hadn't spoken to his brother in over 30 years after a silly argument about money. Last Christmas, he received news his brother had died. Charles said, "I kept waiting for the right moment to fix it. Turns out, the moment never waits for you." He cried for what wasn't broken in time, not because he was weak, but because he was human. Third is feeling forgotten. Seniors often feel invisible, even in their own families. You raise children, you give everything, and then suddenly, you're the one sitting at the edge of the family photo. I met Maria, 79, in Barcelona. Her children live in different countries. They love her, she said. But birthdays now come with text messages instead of hugs. One day, during a holiday dinner, everyone was talking over her. She sat quietly, then excused herself. I found her in the kitchen, wiping her eyes. She said, "I used to be the heart of this house. Now I'm just furniture." The fourth is physical pain that holds emotional weight. Aging hurts, not just the joints, but the sense of losing the body you once trusted. But what people don't talk about is how that pain becomes emotional too. You wake up and can't do what you used to. You reach for something and remember how easy it once was. That memory hurts more than the body. James, 71, from Calgary, told me about his knees giving out. He used to be a mailman, walked miles every day. Now he uses a cane. He said, "I didn't cry when I fell. I cried when I realized I'd never walk without help again." Number 5 is reflection on time and purpose. After retirement, many seniors feel adrift. Who am I if I'm no longer working? If I'm no longer needed in the same way? You start counting not just years, but purpose. Yuta, 68, from Oregon, used to be a nurse. She spent decades caring for others. Now she lives alone, watches TV most days. She told me, "I still have so much love to give, but no one's asking for it." The tears came not from loneliness, but from purpose unspent. And finally, number 6, unexpected kindness. It sounds strange, but sometimes we cry not from sadness, but from being seen. When someone remembers your name, when a child offers their hand, when someone says, "Take your time instead of rushing you." I was in Copenhagen, and I saw a man in his 80s drop his grocery bag. A young woman picked it up, smiled and said, "My grandfather used to love these apples too." The old man didn't say much, but as he walked away, I saw him brush a tear from his cheek. Later he told me it's rare these days to feel noticed. So if you're someone who finds yourself crying more after 60, I want you to hear this from me clearly. You're not broken. You're alive. Every tear is a thread in the story of a life deeply lived. They carry memories, meaning, and healing. And if anyone ever tells you to hold it in, tell them, "No, I've held enough already." Because crying, my friend, is not the opposite of strength. It's the echo of everything we've loved, lost, and still carry. So now that we understand the emotional triggers behind crying, let's go a little deeper. Because behind every tear, there's something more than just sadness. There's history, there's healing, there's a story. And for us seniors, especially those over 65, those stories aren't just memories. They're medicine if we know how to listen to them. I want to walk you through 6 powerful emotional roots that make crying not only normal. Each one has shown up in countless elderly reflections I've heard through the years. And I'll share a real story with each one so you see just how human, how healing, and how universal this experience really is. The first emotional root is accepting mortality. Now, I know that sounds heavy, but when we reach a certain age, we start to realize the road ahead is shorter than the one behind. That truth settles into the body quietly, not with fear, but with a kind of pause. You begin to measure time differently. And with that awareness often comes tears, not from dread, but from clarity, from release. I remember Alfred, a 79-year-old widower from Vermont. One afternoon, he was sitting in his recliner, watching the birds outside. He turned to me and said, "I don't think I'm scared to die. I just wish I had appreciated my mornings more." He cried softly, not from regret, but from gratitude. He saw how precious life had been, even in its ordinary hours. Second is remembering love that shaped us. Love, whether romantic or not, doesn't end with distance or death. It lives in the bones. And sometimes you're just folding laundry and hear a song, or you're cooking an old recipe and boom, the memory hits. I met Teresa, 72, in Dublin. She'd been married for 41 years. Her husband, Patrick, had passed just a year before. She told me he used to hum when he cooked. Not even real songs, just little tunes. One day her grandson was in the kitchen with her and he started humming the same melody. My legs gave out, she said. I had to sit down. I don't know how he knew, but somehow he knew. She cried not out of sadness, but because in that moment, love had time traveled back to her. That's what real connection does. It visits you when you least expect it. The third emotional root is empathy for others. When you've lived a long life, you've seen people fall. You've seen hardship. And sometimes tears come not from your own pain, but from seeing someone else's. That's the wisdom that comes with age. I remember Clara, 84, from Chicago. She was watching a news story about refugees. Quiet, no commentary. But then she whispered, "That was me once. We ran from bombs in the night. I was 9. And just like that, tears ran down her cheeks. She wasn't crying because it still is for someone else. She was crying because it still is for someone else. That's empathy in its purest form. Fourth is letting go of roles we no longer play. As we age, we often have to step away from identities that once defined us. Mother, teacher, provider, leader. And when that role slips away, a part of us grieves. I met Harold, 70, in Texas. He'd been a high school coach for 35 years. The locker room was his second home. But after retirement, the phone stopped ringing. No more game nights, no more boys looking up to him. One evening, he sat on his porch and said, "I still wake up at 6, like I'm supposed to be at practice." And then his voice cracked. But there's no whistle to blow anymore. His tears weren't from loss. They were from release, from trying to understand who he is now without the title. Fifth is facing unfinished forgiveness. This one's a big one. After 60, many of us carry stories that were never resolved. Things we never said, people we never forgave, including ourselves. And sometimes the tears come when we finally see just how heavy those stones have been. I remember Letitia, 77, from Florida. She told me about her daughter, whom she hadn't spoken to in over 15 years. She said things I shouldn't have. And she left. Every Christmas, she baked her daughter's favorite cookies. She kept hoping. One year, she decided to send a letter. Just a small one. And 2 weeks later, she received a response. Just one line, "Thank you for not giving up." When she read it, she broke down in the kitchen. She said, "I thought forgiveness had to be loud. Turns out, it just has to be true." And finally, the sixth emotional root is being witnessed. For seniors, being truly seen, not for what we used to be, but for who we still are, is powerful. You cry when someone sits with you, listens without interrupting, looks into your eyes and says, "I see you." That validation, that recognition is rare in a world that often pushes the elderly to the sidelines. I once spoke with Benjamin, 80, at a small cafe in Berlin. We were just talking about ordinary things. Then I asked, "What's something about you most people overlooked?" He paused and said, "That I still dream. I may be old, but I haven't stopped imagining." And when I told him that matters to me, his eyes filled with tears, not because he was sad, but because someone had seen the boy still alive in the old man's body. So what do all these moments have in common? They all start with emotion, but they end in healing. The tears of seniors aren't random. They're not shameful. They're stories. They're release. They're little doorways back to ourselves. We cry because the heart is still alive. We cry because we remember. We cry because there's still love in us, still hope, still fire. So if you felt emotional lately, if you found yourself crying more than you used to, please don't fight it, don't bottle it. Let it move through you. Because after 60, crying is not about weakness. It's about washing away what no longer serves us, making space for peace. And peace, my friend, is the most beautiful kind of strength. So what happens after the tears? What comes next when the storm has passed and the quiet returns? I've sat with many seniors through that silence, and I can tell you what comes next is not weakness. It's not collapse, it's clarity. Because when you cry at this stage of life, you're not breaking down, you're breaking through. And if you let it, that breakthrough can lead to something powerful. Healing. Let me tell you what happened to a few of the people I mentioned earlier. Because they didn't just cry and stop there. They grew, they softened, and they started seeing life with new eyes. Let's go back to Alfred, the man from Vermont who cried while watching birds and reflecting on his own mortality. A few weeks after our talk, he began a small morning ritual. Just sitting with coffee and naming 5 things he was grateful for. "I don't rush anymore," he said, "because I've cried out the rush. Now I just want to notice." That's what happens when you let the tears in. You make space for presence. You begin to see beauty again, even in the ordinary. Teresa, the woman in Dublin who heard her grandson hum her husband's tune, she took that moment as a sign. Instead of staying buried in grief, she began recording little stories of her life with Patrick on a voice recorder. "I want the kids to know us, not just as old photos, but as real people who laughed and cried and danced in the kitchen." Her tears became a bridge, not just to the past, but to her legacy. And Charles, the man who lost his brother without making peace, his story surprised me most. After the funeral, he joined a senior men's group that met every Thursday. He told me, "I realized I can't go back and fix the past, but I can make sure no one else around me feels that alone again." His grief turned into compassion. That's a quiet kind of redemption, isn't it? Hero, the retired coach who missed the locker room, he didn't stay on that porch forever. One day he walked into the local school and asked if they needed a volunteer. Now twice a week he sits in the gym with kids who need help with homework, or just someone to talk to. "They still call me coach," he said with a smile and a tear. That title didn't retire, it just found a new team. Letitia, who sent that letter to her daughter, she cried the hardest, I think, but now they talk every Sunday. Not always easily, but honestly. She told me, "The tears didn't fix everything, but they softened me." And that made the next step possible. Sometimes it's not about solving the pain, it's about not carrying it alone anymore. And Benjamin, the dreamer in Berlin, he started writing poetry again, nothing fancy, just thoughts scribbled in a notebook. "Tears cleared the fog," he said. And underneath it, I still had stories to tell. So what's the lesson here? It's simple. Your tears are not endings. They're invitations. Invitations to reflect, to release, to remember who you are underneath the roles, the losses, the aches, and the years. Crying opens doors we've kept shut for too long. And on the other side of those doors is always the same thing. Relief. If you take nothing else from this, let it be this. Crying after 60 is not something to hide. It's something to honor. Because what you're really doing is clearing space. And in that space, healing begins. Peace returns. And the soul finally stretches out and breathes. So if you've been holding back tears lately, don't. Let them fall. Let them speak, because they carry the weight of all that mattered, all that still matters. And after 60, tears aren't weakness. They're wisdom. They say, "I've loved, I've lost, I've lived." And that, my friend, is something to be proud of. We cry not because we're broken. We cry because we've made it through, and each tear now, it's a gentle reminder that your heart is still open, still feeling, still alive. So don't rush to wipe them away. Let them teach you, let them heal you. And if this reflection touched something in you today, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs it. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. Join us for more stories, more honesty, more elderly reflections. And before we go, let me ask you, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to know who's sitting on the other side of this story. Until next time, take care of that beautiful heart of yours. You've earned every beat of it.